Hello, everyone. My name is Theo. Thank you, everyone who watched my first video. Going forward, I'm hoping to get my videos out much quicker than this time. I'm going to keep my fingers crossed. This video is sort of a continuation of the last one. So, what I'm doing here is a series where I try to deconstruct the overall concept of God, at least the version that is taught to us in Islam and Christianity. They're very similar. You don't need to watch the videos in order. You probably want to watch all of them at some point to get the full argument. I'll drop a link to the playlist in the description as well as in the pinned comments so you can find the videos easily. Welcome to Theocritic. In the first video, we talked about whether God as an entity could possibly exist. Spoiler, my conclusion was no, he can't. But let's put that conclusion aside for a second. For the sake of argument, let's say God does exist. Let's say there is some higher being out there somewhere that created the universe. This raises the main question for this video, that even if that type of God did exist, why would he care whether we believed in him or not? Like atheists often say God doesn't have time to bother with our trivial lives, right? Because he's too busy. But this is often retorted by believers with God is omnipotent. He can do everything all at the same time effortlessly. Well, to be honest, I agree. This is a fair point. I mean, it would be like if you were drinking tea, making dinner, reading a book, and performing heart surgery all at the same time, effortlessly, right? This is pretty impressive. But if you could do all that, would you want someone standing next to you telling you how awesome you were constantly? Would you demand it? I mean, why would this all powerful creator of the entire universe care so much about us acknowledging his existence or his greatness? Why is he so invested in validation from us? We are so tiny compared to the vastness of the universe that he created. We're essentially just as insignificant as mere atoms in the grand scheme of the universe. So, why would God, the creator of this everything, care what we think about him? And keep in mind, God, as it is taught to us in Islam and Christianity, isn't just doing all of that. He's doing all that and torturing everyone that didn't tell him how awesome he was. Does this God still make sense to you? Let's put this into perspective. Imagine that human beings seeded life on Mars. Let's say we created tiny insects on the red planet. Now, if those insects didn't know we existed or cared what we liked or didn't like or wanted them to do, would we be offended? Would we be butthurt if they never acknowledged that humans created them at all? Would we demand their worship? Would we punish them for not praising us constantly? Would we even care what they believed about us? Like, if we did create them, wouldn't we just want to see what they could achieve? Or would we be jealous if their beliefs weren't all about us? Would we really go out of our way to punish them for not being concerned about apes on another planet? And if someone were to do that, like create life on another planet just to control them and demand praise and then punish them if they didn't comply, then to me, that person sounds like a self indulgent, self absorbed, narcissistic prick and not someone I would consider fair, loving, or virtuous in any way. Not someone I would want as a role model for my kids. I think most of us wouldn't want that. Like, I really want to know, how does this make sense to anyone? Genuinely, leave me a comment and explain it to me because I don't get it. And please don't say his ways are not like our ways or we can't understand God's logic. That doesn't get me any closer to understanding. I want to understand. I want some solid, logical reasons for why this should make sense. Look, I can imagine the existence of a God that created the universe just for us and cares deeply about each of us. That does make sense to me. I can also imagine a God that created the universe but doesn't care what we do, doesn't demand anything from us, hasn't given us any rules. He's just off and doing his own thing. That also makes sense to me. But what I can't wrap my head around is a God that is this grand, this unfathomably vast, as depicted in Islam and Christianity, but is also so incessantly preoccupied with whether we spend every waking moment obsessing over him, building monuments to him, praising him multiple times a day, and following rulers that make laws to glorify his name. And consider this: why would this all knowing God that made us capable of logic and independent thought get angry at us for using that intellect and that critical thinking ability that he gave us? Why would he punish us for not believing in him because we weren't able to find unambiguous evidence supporting his existence? Like, honestly, I'm struggling to make sense of this. If it makes sense to you, tell me. Now, let me illustrate an observation that does make sense to me. When I look at the world, our ancestors, our evolution, I see that we're social creatures. Like many of our closest animal relatives, chimpanzees, gorillas, baboons, and such, we evolved in hierarchical societies. And at the top of those hierarchies, you tend to find individuals with absolute power. Gorillas, for example, are led by a dominant male. He makes all the decisions, and if anyone challenges him, it's settled by force. He doesn't have a court system to answer to. They don't have a constitution that limits the powers of the individuals at the top. He just imposes his power and enforces his will. Whoever is strongest is right. Might makes right. For most of human history, our societies have been structured in exactly the same way. The rulers at the top have tended to have complete power. No one can challenge them without facing consequences, violent consequences. Might makes right. Societies have been structured around it. When the Israelites were forming their concept of gods, they took the power structures of society and government that they had around them and incorporated God into that structure. Their God had absolute power. He favored the Israelites over other people groups. Isn't that exactly what you would expect from the leader of your country? Now, in reality, the concept of deity existed in those societies long before the Israelite people group was formed. And this is a long and slow process. Look, I'm not a scholar of history or the Bible. I'm not pretending to be one. And I'm not being super precise here. A proper study of this would take semesters, not minutes. So I'm taking some liberties here to make a point. In principle, this does make sense. The social hierarchy that was prevalent in a society was extended to include their gods. The god was the introduction. The structure didn't change that much. When Christians emerged out of Judaism, the Jewish laws were adjusted to reflect the values of the new followers, the people that we now call Christians. And when Islam emerged in Arab, they modified Christianity to fit their own values, their own ideas, and their own power structure. Societies were structured around ideas of absolute power, so it's natural for people to imagine their gods in the same way. If their rulers had total control, why wouldn't their gods? New concepts of government like constitutional democracies are rare. They have emerged only a handful of times throughout human history. It doesn't make sense to think that people would imagine a social structure for their gods that was completely different than the social structure of the society that they lived in themselves, right? Consider this: early cars really looked like horse drawn carriages looked. Most modern digital cameras look almost exactly like film cameras. As humans, we tend to build on what we know, and that's exactly what happened with the concept of gods. The idea of God evolved slowly over generations, and it incorporated the power structures of society in which it evolved. In most cases, this meant incorporating patriotism, patriarchy, and absolute complete power. All of that is another manifestation of the recurring theme: might makes right. It becomes especially clear when you think about the ways you'd be expected to behave around kings and rulers. The rituals that you have to perform, the deference that you must show, the distance that you must keep. Rulers went to great lengths to fortify their positions of power. They were always right, as in you had to agree with whatever they said, regardless of whether you truly did or not. You had to praise them even behind their backs. You couldn't approach them without showing the utmost respect. No eye contact, no weapons. You would have to bow your head to them. What was all that about? Well, in the context of these ancient kings and rulers, these rituals were designed to impose their power on you and to show everyone else who was on top. But they were also meant to protect them from physical attack. I mean, the reason you can't make eye contact with them is so that you can't target them for attack, right? Like if you can't see them, you can't aim. The reason you bow your head is to expose your neck, to make it easier for them to decapitate you. You couldn't carry weapons, but they were always surrounded by bodyguards who did carry them. This system of rituals existed entirely to protect them and their power. And if someone else claimed to be king, they had to be killed. And if you supported that other king's claim in any way, including just by calling them king or prince, then you would also have to be killed. They couldn't afford to let any challenge to their authority, even minor ones, go unanswered, because that would erode the appearance of their power. And they did not want to embolden anyone to question their legitimacy. Do these rituals, do these reactions sound familiar to you? Like in the context of earthly kings, it makes perfect sense for them to demand absolute loyalty, to demand obedience and ritual respect. But if we're talking about the literal creator of the universe, why would we need to perform those exact same rituals for him? Why would you have to literally bow your head to the creator of the universe? It made sense to bow your head to the king. It made you more vulnerable, but why does it make sense to the creator of the universe? And why would he want your praise and demand your unwavering loyalty? This is literally a copy and paste of the rituals that were designed to reinforce the power and position of the kings, the earthly kings. And yet, for centuries, we didn't question it because we're used to this kind of ritual and arbitrary power concentration in our own society. When we consider how religion evolved against the backdrop of earthly empires and power structures, it makes sense for humans to create gods that fit into those familiar power structures, right? Kings and rulers need all that pomp and circumstance to display and protect their power. But a God that created the universe, why would he need all that? He could crush the earth with as little effort as it takes for us to blink our eyes. Does he need to hear how great he is from us? Do we need ants to perform rituals to prove how powerful we are compared to them? It's completely ridiculous. And yet that is what we do with God. That is how we think of God, like we have historically thought of kings and conquerors. When you zoom out and look at how religion has spread throughout history, through kings and conquest, it becomes clear that these religions were modeled after social hierarchies of humans. And it just so happens that the religions that spread by conquest are now considered true or legitimate religions, while the ones that got crushed are seen as false. Isn't that convenient? So, no, I'm not convinced that even if a God that created the universe existed, he would be so narcissistic, so jealous, so petty, so stereotypically human as to punish us for not worshiping him. It makes sense to me to expect this behavior from humans, but not from any version of the God that has been taught to us in Islam or Christianity, at least not in any way that makes sense. This picture of God is so flimsy that I don't think it'll ever make sense to me. And this to me has been the most compelling, the most convincing argument against the idea of an all knowing and all powerful God. Okay, so let's recap. Science tells us that humans evolved from apes. And as such, we've developed social structures that are similar to those apes. And this includes absolute power, might makes right. It makes sense because that's just how we've evolved. When religion emerged, it seems to have adopted the idealized versions of the same power structure into itself, but with God on top. Many of those rituals that were designed to protect the power of kings were really just adopted into religion. Now, if a God that created the universe did exist, it could be compared to humans setting up tiny insect life on Mars. And we would not demand that they worship us, nor would we punish them for not doing it. Therefore, I am not convinced that God, even if he did exist, would demand ritual worship and unquestioning belief under the threat of hell, as portrayed in Islam and Christianity. I think it's absurd. I think this is a contradiction of character that must be resolved in order for me to even consider the type of God that is described in Islam or in Christianity. The goal of this channel isn't to browbeat you into accepting my position because I'm shouting it louder than you. I do think I'm right. Of course, I think I'm right. Otherwise, I wouldn't be standing here on my soapbox and shouting about it. But my goal isn't to be right. My goal is to embark on a journey where we expand our understanding of ourselves, of each other, and of our shared humanity. And in order to get there, it will require new skills, new perspectives, and new approaches. It will be challenging, but critical thinking isn't something you can master overnight. It's like swimming. You can learn it in a day, but it can take a lifetime to master. And I'm not a master by any stretch. My goal for this channel is to create a space where we can challenge ourselves, our beliefs, and our assumptions, starting with the ones that we were raised to accept without question. I'm not asking you to follow me. I want you to walk beside me. Let's help each other find our blind spots and grow. Thank you for watching. Thank you for bringing an open mind. And thank you for your good faith comments and contributions. Welcome to Theocritic.